Hello again, everyone, and welcome back. The other day I was looking through the playlist for this series, and by the way, if you didn't know that there was a playlist for this series, there totally is. It has all the episodes in there. It's totally great. But one thing was missing from that list, a video about the ls command. I know, right? I was surprised too. I couldn't believe that I forgot to go over one of the most heavily used commands in the history of Linux in this series, but today I'm going to right that wrong, and we're going to go through a dedicated tutorial that's all about the ls command. And considering that the whole purpose of this series is to go over all of the most commonly used commands when it comes to Linux, it's especially important to have a video about ls. So today, that's exactly what you're going to get, an entire video about ls. Now, before we get to that though, I just need to mention the sponsor for this video, and actually this entire series, Linode. If you haven't already heard of Linode, well, they're a Linux-focused cloud server provider. And with their platform, you can spin up your very own Linux server in mere minutes. And considering that there's over 40 videos in this series as of recording time, with many more coming, Linode is a great service that you could use for spinning up test servers, and you could use those test servers to go along with the various tutorials that are available on this channel. And by using the URL that you see on the screen right now, that'll get you $100 in free credit towards your new account, and that credit is good for up to 60 days. And by using that URL, you're actually supporting LearnLinuxTV, and I'd greatly appreciate that. And their platform is great for more than just spinning up test servers. Linode is the real deal when it comes to providing cloud computing resources. You could literally run your entire business on Linode, or you could use it to do something fun like spinning up a Minecraft server so you and your friends can build a world online together. The only limit is your imagination, so definitely check them out. So thanks yet again to Linode for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and dive into the ls command, and I'll give you some examples of the command in action. It's going to be a simple video like I mentioned, but it is an important one, so let's dive in. Now the ls command is one of the commands that I use quite often, and I wonder if I've done a single video that showed my screen that didn't include the ls command at least once. Obviously, I'm not keeping track at that level, but I doubt it. I doubt there's been a single tutorial that I've had on this channel that didn't use the ls command at least one time. So there's a very good possibility that you probably already know what it does. If you didn't already know, the ls command stands for list storage, and that's exactly what it does. It lists the storage, basically showing you the files and directories that are present in your current working directory. As for me, my current working directory is my home directory, so I have these folders right here that are stored within that directory. Now, if you're at all curious where you are in the file system, you could use the pwd command, which stands for print working directory. I'm in my home directory, like I mentioned earlier, and normally we actually see our directory or the directory we're attached to within the bash prompt. In this case, we see just a tilde, but actually the tilde is shorthand for your home directory. So tilde in this case means the same thing as /home/j in my case. It refers to your home directory. Now, obviously this video isn't about the pwd command, but it is one of those commands that you probably would use along with the ls command. I mean, in order to understand where you're going, you have to understand where you've been, right? Well, that might not be the best analogy here, but it kind of fits. The pwd command tells you where you are, so if you want to go somewhere, go into a different directory, then knowing where you are currently might be helpful. If nothing else, if you didn't know about the pwd command, well, now you do. Anyway, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with the basic usage of the ls command. Again, it shows us the contents of our current working directory. Now, when it comes to options, what I like to do is actually use -l along with the ls command. That gives us a long listing. That's my preferred method of using ls actually, because it gives us a lot more information. We see modification dates, modification times, the user that owns that directory or file, the group that owns that directory or file. In my case, it's J straight down for both user and group. And we also see the permission string all the way on the left-hand side. We can also use the ls command against a specific directory. If we don't give it a directory, then the ls command assumes that we want to view information about the directory that we're inside of right now. But we don't have to do that though. What we could do is actually use the ls command against another directory. So for example, what I'm going to do is show you the contents of my wallpaper directory. That might seem like a boring example, but I've only just set up this Ubuntu installation the other day, so I don't really have any files here yet, at least nothing too interesting. But inside this directory, I have my chroma wallpaper, which is actually something that I use for video editing. It's just a green screen background, for example. To show you the difference, if you're curious, I'll just show you the unedited version of this particular clip right here. So here you can see the green. Now, if I go back to the edited version, now you see what it actually becomes. Because with the chroma background, I just delete that color in post. That allows me to do this fancy background that you see here. So I just figured I would mention that as a bit of aside for those of you that are interested in video editing or how I do some of the things that I do. But anyway, back to LS. Right here we see the chroma wallpaper file in my wallpaper directory, and I was able to use the ls command against a different directory other than the one that I'm currently attached to. Now you might be wondering what the 29883 represents. Well, that actually leads me to another option that I would like to show you. I'll add the H option to that. And actually, if you didn't already know, options within Linux are going to be like -L, -H, and so on. But you can combine the single dash options together with one dash, which is what I'm doing here. So I'm adding the -H option with -L under one dash, so I get -LH. Anyway, when I press enter, you can see that that 29883 has changed to 30K. So that's the file size. So the H option represents human readable. It's going to give you the output or the file sizes within the output in the form of megabytes, gigabytes, kilobytes, and so on. That's easier for humans to read. Now, obviously, I'm sure there's some of you out there that have no problem whatsoever with those longer numbers, but I think it's easier just to use the H option with the ls command, and also the -L option for long listing. That's useful too. Now, I've already showed you the contents of my home directory here. I don't really have all that much, but actually I do have quite a few files here. If I type ls and then -A, you can see that I have quite a few more files than I had the first time I ran that command. The -A option allows you to view hidden files. Files that you name with a period at the beginning of the file name are considered hidden files. Those are not going to be shown by default. That's true of your file manager as well as in the terminal when you use the ls command. So for example, if I was to bring up a file manager, which I have right here, we actually see the same contents inside my file manager as we see right here the first time that we ran the ls command. Now in the file browser, at least on Linux anyway, what I could do is hold Control and press H, and that activates the showing of hidden files in most of the file managers on Linux. So you could think of the -A option here with the ls command as the command line equivalent of showing the hidden files here in a file manager. It's the same thing. The file manager shows you the same thing the ls command will show you. It's just that one is graphical and one is not. So I can hold Control and press H again to hide the hidden files. Now I'm back to seeing just those. In addition, we can, of course, include the -A option with the other options. We already know what -L does, we know what -H does, and now we know what -A does as well. So I've actually consolidated those into one dash. And when I press enter, we get a long listing with hidden files being shown and human readable mode activated. So just like any of the other Linux commands out there, you can combine options together to adjust the output that you see when you run a command. Now, something that's important to know about the ls command that a lot of you might not know is that the ls command that you execute on the majority of Linux distributions is actually an alias. Now, I've gone over aliases in another video, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that here. But just to show you a little bit about what I'm talking about, if I run the alias command, we'll see a list of all the aliases that I'm using on my system. Now, actually, we have a few aliases here that are specific to the ls command. Now, whenever we actually run the ls command, we are actually running a command that's located at /user/bin/ls. But here we have an alias for ls, and that's set to ls-color = auto. So what's up with that? Well, whenever you have an alias that's named the same as a command is named on the system, then the alias is going to override the command itself. So in this case, whenever I run the ls command, I'm running the alias for the ls command. And again, that's true for the majority of distributions out there. So if we run the unaliased version or the normal version of LS, then the output is going to look a lot different. And I could run the installed version of LS without the alias by just calling the full path to the command just like this. Now we can notice the difference right away. The output isn't colorized at all. Now the alias for LS, which we can inspect directly by just running alias and then LS, so that way we view only that one alias and not the others, we can see that every time that I execute ls on this system, I'm actually executing ls-color equals auto. And a lot of distributions out there will alias the ls command, and the alias is going to look different from one distribution to another. But anyway, by running /user bin ls, we are seeing the output of the ls command without any modifications, changes, quirks, adjustments of any kind at all. It's just the normal output of the ls command. Now the reason why I bring this up is because colorized output is very useful, but you can't always rely on it. Well, actually, now you kind of can, because I'm about to show you how to activate color mode, even if your distribution doesn't use that by default. So for example, if I use ls, and then I add the option --color, now you can see that I have colorized output. And I could also combine that with -l and a as well, just like we did earlier. We see colorized output here as well. So when we have colorized output, it's very common for directories to be blue, files to be white, and executable files to be green. There's going to be other examples of colorized output as well that I won't get into, but I wanted to mention this just so you guys are aware that colorized output is a customization, not a default. Some distributions out there do not include the --color option as part of the default ls command, but you can easily replicate that if you want that by adding the --color option manually in your end. So if you didn't already know you could do that, well, now you do. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is give you guys some additional options when it comes to the ls command. And I'll even show you my favorite version of the ls command before I close the video. Now the next variation I'm going to show you is ls with the --F option. Do you notice the difference? Well, what you should notice is that there's a trailing slash at the end of every directory. Well, actually, I only have directories here. If you recall, I had some hidden files that were actually files. Well, technically everything in Linux is a file, but you get my point. What I'm going to do is just use -A here to show all the files. And what you can see is that directories with the --F option will have a trailing slash, and files will not. Now, that's not going to revolutionize your usage of the command line. It might be something that you could find useful. It is a common practice in Linux to have a trailing slash at the end of a directory. When you type out a directory in documentation, regardless of color, that helps you understand that it is a directory. You could also use this to make sure when you're copying files, that if you're copying files into a directory, that you include the trailing slash. And what that helps you prevent is a situation when you are copying or moving a file into a directory. By including the trailing slash, you're telling the command line that you want that file copied into a specific directory, but it must be a directory. Don't copy it into a file. Don't create a file with the same name. You're specifically looking for a directory. Again, that's not something that's going to revolutionize your usage of the command line, but it might be a useful option for some of you. And if nothing else, that might actually help you understand within the output of the ls command which object is a file, as well as which object is a directory. On my end, though, whenever I run ls, I always make sure to use the -L option. Again, that's one of my favorite options. But one of the benefits of that is the permission string on the left-hand side that actually tells you whether an object is a file or a directory. If there's a D at the beginning of the permission string, then the object is a directory, aka a folder. If you see a hyphen as the first character instead of a D, then that means that the object is a file. Now there's other things that can exist at the beginning of a permission string other than D or hyphen, but at the very least, it's important to understand that D is for directory, hyphen is for file. If you have no other way to tell the difference, then that's a good way to tell the difference. Now to make this example even better, if I add the A option here to show hidden files, you can see what I'm talking about when I said that files start with a hyphen at the beginning of the permission string. So now that I've used the -A option to show all files, well, you can see that here. We have a file that's called .profile. We know that's a file because there's no D at the beginning, there's a hyphen. And then the pictures directory above it, we know that is a directory from the presence of the D character at the beginning, but you get the idea. Now for the next example, what I'm going to do is target the Etsy directory as the directory that I want to view the contents of. And this is actually a pretty cool example. So I'll type ls, and then I'll type the options, and I'll tell you what the options do here in just a moment. But what I'm going to do is type dash, then LH. We already know what those options do. But do you know what the T option does? What about the R option? Do you know what that does? Well, you're about to find out. So again, what I want to do is view the contents of the Etsy directory. Now, if I scroll up here to the very beginning of the output, and there's a lot of files here. Now, can you spot the difference here? Well, one thing that you might notice right away is that the file names are no longer in alphabetical order. They were the first time, but now they're not. The first file here is the RPC file. It shows that it was modified in 2013. So I guess that particular file within the Etsy directory was created quite a while ago. Now watch what happens when I go back to the command prompt. We have a directory that has a modification date of October 4th, which is the date that I'm recording this video. I'm kind of curious how long it's going to take me to get this video out to you guys. There could be a few months between the time that I record something and the time that I get it edited and uploaded. But anyway, as of the time I'm recording this video, today is October 4th, and the cups directory is listed at the end. But anyway, what this particular variation of the ls command is doing is it's actually sorting the contents of the directory by time, modification time, and modification date, instead of being in alphanumeric order. And this could be useful because if you're a Linux administrator and the server is all of a sudden not behaving correctly, the Etsy directory might be a good directory to start your investigation in because that's where most of your config files are. So you might want to know what's changed recently. And this is a great way to find out. If you sort the contents of a directory by time, then what you're going to see is the newest modified file or directory at the end of the output, right above the command prompt. And in this case, if I was having an issue with my printer, for example, then I would know that the printer config was recently changed on October 4th. That's what the cups directory is. Cups actually is a printing service to enable the ability for you to use a printer. So again, if my printer wasn't working and I saw that the cups directory had a modification made, then that might actually narrow down my troubleshooting. Anyway, what I'm going to do at this point is show you guys my favorite variation of the ls command. And this one is actually going to be a bit long, so just bear with me here. I'll show you how to make an alias of this command here in a moment. It's going to be my bonus trick of this video, but just bear with me as I type out this option. You might actually be surprised how many options I add to ls every time I use it. So I'll type ls, and then -lh with a capital F, and then --time-style. I'm going to set that equal to long-iso. --color, we'll set that to auto. --ignore, and then I'll set that equal to lost plus found. And this is wrapping over the right-hand side of the screen, but you get the idea. This is my favorite variation of the ls command. Now, you may or may not notice all of the differences at first glance. Now, one thing you might notice is that the date format is completely different now. The date format has changed to year, month, and then day. That's what my preference is. Now, for you, depending on what country you live in, you might be wondering, what's the big deal? All of our dates are written this way. What's so special about that? Well, here in the United States, we do everything differently, and we don't actually use this date format. And being an American myself, you might think that I prefer the format that we use here in this country, but to be honest with you, this is my favorite format. Year, month, and then day. I think it's the best format. That's just my opinion, but I think a lot of you might agree with me on that. Now, on your end, you could customize this however you'd like, so if this isn't a format that you prefer to use, you can absolutely change that. You could view the man page for the ls command, for example, to view the different styles that you could use for sorting files. Color, we already know what that does. It's going to colorize the output, so you already knew that. But what is the --ignore option doing? And what is up with that lost plus found? Well, without getting too much into detail about the lost and found directory, that is a directory that might exist on external storage media or any hard drives that you might have internally. And I don't really work with that directory all that often. In fact, it's quite rare. So I really don't want to see that every time I use the ls command. If there's anything else you would rather ignore and not see, you can add another ignore option, and you can have that ignored as well. But the problem here is that this command is very long. But to fix that, I'll show you how to create an alias. So if I was to use alias and then ls, I want to override the current ls alias that exists. I'm going to set that equal to something, and then in double quotes, I'll just go ahead and type that same exact ls command all over again. So again, that was ls-lh and then capital F, -- time style. I have that set to long ISO. -- color, again, that was set to auto. -- ignore. Lost plus found. So now anytime I enter the ls command, it's actually entering that long string of options that I have there at the top because I created a new alias that had the same name as an existing alias, ls. So now that alias is going to be used anytime I go to use the ls command. But unfortunately, whenever I close this terminal, that alias will be lost and I'll need to recreate it again. But one quick trick I could do is I could use a text editor, maybe something like Nano, for example, and then I could edit my .bashrc file. And then what I could do is actually look for the ls alias. This is actually where that alias is set. The distribution gave me this particular config file by default. This is the config file for bash itself. Here it is. So what I'm going to do is actually just back all of this out right here and type in all those same options. So what I'll do is save the file. In the case of Nano, that's Control-O and then Enter, and then Control-X to exit out. And now we have those changes in that config file. The changes that we've made in that file will not take effect until the next time I open a terminal window, but we can cheat a bit, and we could type exec and then bash. That'll reread that config file. And there's going to be no difference here because the alias I've created is the same as the one that I manually created on the command line. But at the very least, I don't have to worry about this particular alias being undone. Every time I open a new terminal window, it's going to be recreated for me. Now, before I close out this video, there's another alias I would like you to be aware of, and that's the LL alias. Now, this alias in particular will not exist on every installation of Linux, but quite a few distributions actually include this by default. Now, you might not notice a ton different here. I mean, I already have the ls alias that's going to be overriding some of this, but the LL alias is actually an alias for a long listing. As you can see here, the distribution that I'm using, in this case Ubuntu, has the LL alias set to ls-al capital F. The LL alias might be different on your distribution, but in summary, the LL alias exists to give you a long listing by default. So if I didn't customize anything within my terminal at all, what I would be able to do is use ls to view a listing of files in my current working directory. Obviously, that's what it does, but it's not in the long listing format by default. But the LL alias is going to typically include the -l option, which is going to meet its purpose of giving you a long listing. If the LL alias doesn't exist, you can always create it on your end if you'd like. You could just add that right to the bashrc file if that's something that you want to do. But I just wanted to make you aware that that alias exists, and it doesn't exist on every distribution like I mentioned, but it does exist on quite a few of them by default. Now there's one more tip that I'll give you guys. This is a bonus, yet another bonus. I think I've given you a few bonuses in this video. And in particular, what I'm going to do is show you where that .bashrc file actually came from. So if you go into the /etc/skel directory, skel is short for skeleton, and then you list the storage, at first, there's not going to be anything within that directory. However, if we show hidden files, we're going to see that in my case, I have 3 files in that directory. Now, the etc/skel directory is a very interesting directory. Any files that are created inside this directory will be copied into the home directory of every user as soon as a user is created. So if I was to create a new user right now, then the .bash logout, the .bashrc, and the .profile files will be copied into that new user's directory, their home directory, as soon as that user is created. So that's actually where a lot of distributions out there will include their customizations to the .bashrc file. So for example, if I was to go ahead and open that up, and it's telling me that that particular file is unwritable. It's owned by root, so that really doesn't matter in this case. But if I scroll through here, what we're actually seeing is the distribution's provided version of the .bashrc file. And that's where that ls alias or any ls aliases you may have already on your system are actually coming from. If we scroll down a little bit too far here, we start to see some of the aliases that Ubuntu in this case is providing by default. Here's where the default ls is declared. We've already seen that earlier. Then here is where we have the ll option. We also have an alias la to show hidden files. Well, you get the point. And actually, I've talked about aliases quite often in this particular video, so I do feel inclined to let you know that I have a video that goes over aliases in more detail. If that's something that interests you, there's actually some really fun things that you can do with aliases, so I highly recommend you check that video out. It's not really related to this one, but since I mentioned aliases so many times, then I may as well mention that video. But anyway, that's about it for the ls command. Of course, there's going to be additional options if you check the man page for ls, but I'll leave that up to you. If nothing else, I hope that the information that I've gone over in this video is helpful to you, and you've seen several examples of the ls command, and I hope that at least one of those examples was one that you didn't already know about. So in this video, I gave you guys several examples of the ls command. It's probably the most used command when it comes to Linux. I don't think I've met a single Linux administrator that doesn't use the ls command. It's just one of those commands that's pretty much a staple when it comes to Linux. Now, did this video help you out at all? If it did, then please consider clicking that like button to let YouTube know that you found it helpful. I would really appreciate that. Anyway, I have some awesome content coming for you guys very soon that I'm working on, and I'm going to go ahead and get back to that. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again very soon.